I just captured the clearest video of Bigfoot in history. Not a distant sighting, but footage that captures the exact moment that I was about to get killed by him up close. But this video is just the tip of the iceberg, because what I'm about to show you will overwhelm you with so much proof you will have to accept that the Sasquatch is real. My name is Julie, and I grew up in a logging family in the Pacific Northwest, where the forest wasn't a place we visited. It was the place we lived and understood from the inside out. And somehow, after all that time, I'm the one who ended up filming Bigfoot, and this video proves it. Bigfoot was there at the edge of the trees, far enough that my eyes were still arguing with what my body already knew. The feeling that came with it wasn't panic. It was something quieter and somehow worse than that. It reminded me of being a little girl holding a toy tree from a playset. The way those tiny painted trunks looked completely believable until you set them next to something real. That's what those trees looked like standing next to it. The distances I thought I knew felt suddenly unreliable, and the weight of its presence moving through that terrain was something I felt before I fully registered it with my eyes. It hadn't seen me yet. I was downwind, I was still, and its attention was directed somewhere else entirely. It was moving through the tree line slowly, pausing every few steps to look in one direction, then continuing, like it was checking something, completing a circuit it had completed before. Each pause had the same duration. Each check covered the same arc. This wasn't wandering. This was a pattern, something repeated enough times that the repetition had worn itself into the behavior. And watching it, I understood that whatever I had walked into had been happening long before I arrived and had absolutely nothing to do with me. The pauses were the part that stayed with me, not the movement, but the stillness between movements. The way it would stop and hold completely for 3 or 4 seconds before continuing, like it was receiving information and processing it before deciding to take the next step. That kind of patience doesn't come from instinct, it comes from somewhere else. And standing there watching it, I had this deeply uncomfortable feeling that I was a newcomer, that whatever routine this thing had in these woods, I had been walking through the middle of it my entire life without ever knowing. That's when it all started connecting. The smell that had hit me earlier, that dense, heavy, biological thing I had never encountered in all my years out there, that was it. The silence that had dropped all at once. No birds, no insects, nothing. The kind of silence I had never once heard in those woods in any season. That was it too. My body had known before my eyes did, had slowed my pace and quieted my steps and tightened my grip on my phone without a single conscious instruction from me. And standing there, watching it move through the trees, I understood that I hadn't stumbled onto something. I had walked directly into the middle of something that was already happening, and the only reason I was still undetected was luck. And then, without any warning and without any apparent reason, it stopped completely in the middle of a stride and stood absolutely still at the edge of the trees. And then I watched it raise its head slowly, and I knew immediately what it was doing. It was reading the air, standing there processing whatever the wind was carrying with a patience and a methodical calm that had no urgency in it at all. And what unsettled me most wasn't the size of it, or even the fact of it. It was the intelligence behind that stillness, the deliberateness of it. This wasn't an animal catching a scent and reacting. This was something that knew how to gather information before it decided what to do with it. And I wonder sometimes whether what it found in that wind was enough to tell it exactly where I was standing before it even turned its head. It turned and looked directly at me, and then it started moving, and the way it came toward me was so much more frightening than any aggression would have been, because aggression has a shape and a duration and an endpoint, and this had absolutely none of those things, just one steady, deliberate step after another, closing the distance between us in a way that felt less like an animal approaching, and more like weather rolling in. Inevitable? Indifferent, already in motion long before I became aware of it. I was backing up with the camera still raised, and I remember trying to keep the frame steady while also tracking where my feet were going, because the terrain behind me had roots and uneven ground, and anything that made me stumble was going to cost me distance I couldn't afford to lose. Every step it took was clean and certain, Every step I took backward was a negotiation. The camera catches this stretch in a way that I think is one of the most important parts of the footage. Not because of what it shows about the size of it, though that registers clearly, but because of what it shows about the difference between how it moves and how I move. You can see the ground between us. You can see what that ground does to my pace and what it doesn't do to its. There are rocks, there are roots, there is a shallow drainage cut that runs diagonal across the space between us. The kind of thing that would make any person adjust their stride without thinking, and it doesn't adjust. It doesn't register any of it. The ground between us was something I had to solve one step at a time, and for whatever was coming toward me, it simply didn't exist as a problem. That gap, not the physical distance, but the functional one, the difference between terrain that slows you down and terrain that means nothing. That's what the footage captures, and that's what kept replacing every calculation I was trying to make with something I liked a lot less. What I noticed as it got closer was the way it moved through the undergrowth. No negotiation with the terrain, no adjustment for the branches or the uneven ground. Just this clean, continuous forward movement that showed absolutely no awareness of the physical environment between us as an obstacle. And I remember thinking that if I turned and ran, the only thing that mattered was how much of a head start I could get. And that number was shrinking with every second I stood there. I also noticed the way its arms moved, and this is the part I've never quite been able to find the right words for. Not swinging the way a person's arms swing, not hanging the way an animal's limbs hang. Something that sat between those two things, and also belonged to neither of them. A movement pattern my brain kept reaching for a category for, and kept coming back empty, like trying to remember a word that exists in a language you don't speak. And then it made a sound that I still hear sometimes in the space between being asleep and being awake. It wasn't a roar, wasn't a scream, wasn't any of the vocalizations I might have had some prior reference point for. It was lower than all of that, and deeper than all of that, something that seemed to originate in its chest and travel through the ground before it reached me. And I felt it vibrating in my sternum a full half-second before my ears registered it as sound. I've heard thunder roll through those mountains and felt it in my chest the same way, except thunder doesn't have a source standing 12 feet away from you that is looking directly at you when it happens. The camera picks it up. When you reach that moment in the footage, you will hear it, and I need you to understand that what comes through a screen is a fraction of what it felt like standing there receiving it with nothing between me and the source of it. And that sound is the moment everything I had been holding together stopped holding. The shift happened without any kind of buildup. 1 second it was moving the way it had been, steady and controlled, and the next it stopped and drove its arm into a tree hard enough that the entire trunk snapped sideways in frame. The impact wasn't a crack or a break. It was a deep, heavy sound that carried through the ground first. I felt it in my chest before I understood what I was hearing. And the camera caught the leaves shaking loose all at once. The trunk still moving after the point of contact, like something had hit it with more force than the wood knew how to absorb. My hand dropped for half a second and came right back up, not because I was thinking about it, but because some part of me understood that lowering the camera meant losing whatever this was, and I wasn't going to get another chance at it. It didn't follow that with anything. No charge, no sudden movement toward me. It just stood there, and the footage holds on it through that. Stillness in a way that I think matters as much as the strike itself. You can see the trunk still moving in the background, still working through the energy of the impact, and in the foreground it's completely still. Not the stillness of something that spent itself on the strike, but the stillness of something that had more, and chose not to use it. It was looking at me the way you look at something when you've just made a point, and you're waiting to see if the point landed. And the distance between us in that frame, close enough that the camera catches detail it hadn't been catching before, close enough that there's no question about what you're looking at, was exactly the distance it had chosen, not the distance I had managed to create. That distinction mattered. That was the moment the distance between us stopped feeling like protection, because whatever it had just done, it hadn't been about the tree. It had been about showing me exactly how much space it didn't need. There were moments where it looked clear enough, where the frame held and the distance felt close, But every time it got to that point, something broke it. It would step just enough to distort the outline or pass through a shadow that flattened the shape, or I'd lose it for half a second trying to keep up. The footage shows it, the moments where it almost locks in and then slips just out of it. You can see size, movement, detail, but not enough to remove every other explanation. Standing there, I understood something that didn't help me at all. Being close wasn't the same as having it clearly. It moved before I understood that it had decided to. There was no build-up this time, just one step that turned into several all at once, fast enough that the frame couldn't hold it cleanly. I tried to follow it with the camera and realized almost immediately that I was already behind it, that whatever sense I had of how quickly it could cross that ground had been wrong in a way that mattered. The footage still catches enough of it. You can see how much distance disappears in the space it takes me to react, how easily it moves through ground that should have slowed it down. I felt my footing shift as I stepped back, not even a full step, just enough to keep that space from collapsing completely. And even that felt late. If it decided to close that distance, what would I even do? And then it stopped again, not where it had been, and not where I expected it to be, but closer. Like it had chosen that position instead of arriving at it, standing there with the camera still up, trying to steady it without losing sight of it. I understood that whatever distance existed between us wasn't something I could manage anymore. It was something it was controlling. It didn't come straight at me again. It angled off just enough to put a stretch of thicker growth between us. Tight brush, young trees close together, the kind of ground that forces you to slow down. It didn't slow down at all. The camera holds on it as it moves straight into that stretch, and the difference is immediate. Branches snap instead of bending. Thin trunks jerk sideways as it passes, some of them not springing back right away. There's no hesitation in its movement, no change in pace, just a clean, continuous push forward like nothing in front of it is meant to stop it. You can actually see the path it's making as it goes, not around anything, but through it. I remember watching that and running the same calculation I had been running since this started. What would it look like if I went through that same stretch at a full run? How much distance would I lose just fighting through what it was walking through without breaking stride? And the answer was enough that I stopped finishing the calculation because finishing it wasn't useful. I took a step back without meaning to and felt my footing catch almost immediately, just enough to remind me how that ground actually works. It slows you down. It forces you to choose every step. And then it came through the other side still moving, still steady, like none of it had cost it anything at all. There wasn't anything out there I could put between us that would matter. The moment it cleared that stretch, something else moved. Working through this footage led me into other cases that share the same kinds of patterns, and the more I looked into them, the more consistent those patterns became across completely different places. I gathered everything in one place, so if you want to take a closer look at it, the link is in the description. It wasn't in the same place. It came from deeper in the trees, off to the side of where I had been focused, and the camera doesn't catch it cleanly because I didn't move fast enough to follow it. Just a shift, a disturbance that didn't match anything I had seen the wind do, or anything small enough to ignore. It was heavier than that, deliberate in a way I couldn't place, but couldn't dismiss either. How long it had been there before it moved, I had no way of knowing, and that question arrived with a weight that the presence itself hadn't fully produced yet. I kept the frame on the one in front of me because I didn't know what would happen if I lost it. The footage picks up the audio, a low shift, something pressing through brush in a way that felt too measured to be random, moving at a pace that didn't match anything startled or reactive. It was lateral movement. It wasn't coming toward me. It was going somewhere specific, parallel to where I was standing, and the specific quality of that, the fact that it had a destination that wasn't me, was somehow more unsettling than if it had been approaching, because it meant there was a geometry to this that I wasn't seeing yet. Whatever was moving through those trees wasn't reacting to me. It was moving into position regardless of me, on a line that had been decided before I was aware any of this was happening. The timing started lining up. The one in front of me didn't move, but it didn't need to. It was already where it needed to be. The one in the trees wasn't wandering. It was moving on a line, steady, covering ground without hesitation. I tried to track it by sound, where it started, how far it had moved, and the distance it covered without me fully registering it didn't make sense unless it had been doing that the entire time. The one in front shifted slightly, and this time it didn't feel like a reaction. It matched. That was when it stopped feeling like two separate things and started feeling like I had stepped into something already in motion. I wasn't being approached. I was being placed. The sound continued, steady, unhurried, covering ground. And I remember trying to estimate from the audio alone how large it was and how far it had already traveled from wherever it started. And both of those estimates kept coming out larger than I wanted them to. The one in front of me hadn't moved. It was still holding its position, still oriented toward me, but something in the quality of its attention had shifted in a way the camera picks up if you're watching for it. A slight reorientation, not toward the sound, but as if in response to it, like the sound wasn't information it needed to locate, but confirmation of something it already knew. That distinction between locating a sound and confirming it was the thing that started changing what I understood about what was happening around me. The one in front of me noticed it the way you notice something you've been expecting. It didn't react the way something reacts to an unexpected sound. It shifted in a way that looked more like acknowledgement, the way you turn towards something you already knew was coming. A slight repositioning, weight transferring, its attention moving just a few degrees before settling back. And then it adjusted its position in relation to me, not by coming straight forward, but by angling just enough that I was no longer directly in front of it, the way I had been. The movement wasn't big and it wasn't fast, but it was exact. Like it was placing itself somewhere specific, like there was a plan, and it was executing its part of it. Then the sound from the trees shifted again, further along now, further around. And I realized it had covered more ground than I had been tracking. I had been monitoring it as a fixed point, and it had been moving the whole time, and the distance it had traveled, while I wasn't fully attending to it, landed in a way that made me reassess everything I thought I knew about where I was standing relative to what was out there. The one in front of me had my attention. That had been true since the beginning, and something had been using that. I started backing toward the house without deciding to. Not running, moving the way you move when something in you has already done the calculation and doesn't want to alarm whatever is watching by making it obvious. The one in front of me didn't follow. It held its position and watched me go, and that stillness felt worse than the approach had, because an animal that wants to close distance closes it. This didn't. It just watched me leave, with the particular patience of something that knows exactly where I'm going. I reached the house. I got inside. I pulled the door shut, and then both sides of the house started making noise at the same time. The sounds weren't the same. The one on the left was heavier, slower, each step carrying through the wall like weight being set down. The one on the right moved faster, covering more ground, lighter but more precise. Their movement started out uneven, but quickly aligned into something deliberate. The one on the right slowed just enough. The one on the left adjusted. And suddenly, they were moving in a way that felt controlled, like the difference between them wasn't a limitation. It was something they could correct. I turned between the two sides, trying to follow both, and realized I couldn't, not because they were fast, but because they didn't need to be. They already knew where I was. Not one presence moving around the structure. Two, I could hear them separately. One along the left wall, one along the right, moving in a way that had no overlap, no confusion, no doubling back, distinct, coordinated. The camera catches it if you listen carefully, the sound shifting on both channels almost simultaneously. One of them was moving faster than the other, covering more of the perimeter, and I remember turning between the two walls trying to track both at once and understanding that the only thing that exercise was telling me was how many directions I couldn't watch at the same time. The left wall went quiet first. Then the right continued for another few seconds, something large pressing along the exterior in a way that carried through the boards. And then that stopped too. A full stop, not a fade, like both of them had reached wherever they were going at the same time and simply arrived. The silence after that was different from the silence before. It had a shape to it. It felt less like absence and more like held breath, like whatever was outside those walls had stopped moving, not because it had left, but because it had finished. I opened the door before I had a reason to, not because it felt safe, because the walls had stopped feeling like a boundary and started feeling like a box, and whatever was outside those walls already knew exactly which box I was in. I stepped out and the clearing was empty, completely still. No movement at the tree line, no sound from either side of the house, nothing in the air that I could point to. I scanned left first, along the wall where one of them had been moving. The ground there was undisturbed in the way ground looks when nothing has crossed it recently, and I held the camera on it long enough to confirm that before moving on. I scanned right. The same. Whatever had been pressing along those walls had not left tracks I could see from where I was standing, had not broken anything, had not left any physical evidence of the path it took, and the absence of that evidence was its own kind of information. I held the camera on the tree line directly ahead for a long moment, watching for any shift in the shadows between the trunks, any weight moving through the undergrowth, any branch that was still returning to position from something that had passed through it. The trees stood the way they always stand. The light between them was unchanged, and the longer I stood there finding nothing, the more wrong the nothing felt. I had heard two separate presences moving around the outside of that structure, and they had not walked away. I had not heard them walk away. They had simply stopped, and stopped things don't disappear. They're somewhere, holding still, and the only question is where. I kept the camera on the tree line longer than I should have. Nothing moved, nothing broke, but parts of it didn't sit right. There were gaps between the trees that felt too solid, patches of shadow that didn't shift the way they should when you look at them from different angles. Every time I tried to focus on one, it looked normal again, but not completely. The longer I stood there, the harder it was to believe there was nothing there, because nothing stays that still. I took 4, maybe 5 steps further into the open, enough to clear the doorway completely, enough to see the full arc of the tree line from one end to the other. And that's when I understood that the stillness wasn't absence. It was arrangement. They were already there, not at the tree line. Closer than that. I had walked back out directly into the middle of the space they had positioned themselves around, and not one of them had needed to move to make that happen. I had done it myself. The first one I saw was to my left, not the one I had been watching this entire time. A different one, positioned further back, but not far enough back, close enough that the camera catches it without any ambiguity at all. I swung toward it without thinking and held it in frame for long enough to confirm what I was seeing. The shape of it, the stillness of it, the fact that it was facing me and had been facing me before I turned. And in that moment, while I was focused left, the one I had been tracking the entire time stepped back into view directly ahead of me. The camera lurches as I try to hold both at once, and that's when I see where the one in front is looking, not at me, past me, to the right. I turned, and there was the third, closer than either of the others, positioned at the edge of the clearing in a way that put it almost behind me. And the camera catches it fully. Size, shape, stillness, all of it. In the clearest frame this footage produces. Clearer than anything before it, clearer than anything I had been able to confirm up to that point, because this one wasn't obscured by distance or tree cover or the limits of what I could hold in frame while I was moving. It was right there, in open ground, in full view, making no effort to be anything other than completely visible. All 3 of them were looking at me. Not at each other, not at the tree line, not at anything else. The one ahead, the one to the left, the one behind me, and to the right. All of them still, all of them present, all of them arranged in an arc that I was standing at the center of. And then the one in front took 1 step forward into the best light and stopped. The step brought it fully into the open, into a position where nothing was between it and me. No branches in the way, no shadow cutting through it, no movement to blur the shape. Just open ground and full light, and the camera holding it long enough that nothing breaks the image. This time the frame doesn't chase it. It locks into place and holds steady. You can see everything, the height against the trees behind it, the way its arms hang, the way its shoulders sit, the way it stands without shifting or adjusting. There's no distortion, no obstruction, no moment where it slips out of view. It holds there in frame, uninterrupted, long enough that nothing about what you're seeing breaks or changes. Long enough that you don't have to pause it, don't have to question it, don't have to fill in anything your eyes didn't catch. And that was the first moment where nothing about it could be mistaken for anything else.